excuse me.
طبعا
اصل انا ما تقاطعتش معاها خالص، لا ما تقاطعتش معاها خالص، لا
لا طبعا كانت معايا.
هي كانت موجوده في السنه اللي كنت في ستانفورد فيها
اوكي
بالصدفه لان انا كنت موجود من قبلها.
ايوه
نادين.
Very nice to meet you.
بليز.
انا كنت مش مركزه مش حاطه مش تقولي يا مريم.
طب تخشوا بقى.
تقولي يا مريم الاكس ستودنت بتاعتي.
You got me. You got inequality up, my friend.
Please.
Hello, absent-minded professor. You got inequality in the Middle East up. I'm not speaking about this. I've already done this.
That's not me. That is some other absent-minded member of the team. Not me. Are you sure you didn't send this?
No, 100%. I can still.
No. We will get the presentation.
No.
That's not the presentation that the professor sent. Can you please get the one that we sent while I introduce him? So please, like different intervals between 2006 and 2014. The professor, of course, is very well published with two relatively recent books that came out with Cambridge and Oxford University presses. And that were translated into not only these books, but like his works more generally into different languages, including French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and German, in addition, of course, to your writings in Hindi. So without further ado, Professor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
This is the right presentation.
This is the right presentation. Okay. So that's what I will be speaking about. And, you want me to wait for a few more minutes? Or do you want me to start? Yes, okay.
Good to go.
Ready? Good to go. Okay, there we are. Right. India became the largest population country in the world last year. But thankfully, simultaneously, it's also been growing very fast, meaning in terms of GDP. I'm an economist, as you were understood, so when I keep using the word growing, I'm talking about GDP and per capita income. India has been, for the last 20 years, among the fastest growing economies of the world. It's been the second fastest growing large economy of the world for 20 years after China. China was, as you probably all know, the fastest growing economy. For about 30 years, it grew at 9 to 10% per annum. That's unprecedented in Indian history. And because it managed to do that, it managed to also reduce poverty in China very rapidly. India has also been growing very rapidly, but not as fast as China for the last 30 years. And it has, for pretty much most of that time, been the second fastest growing large economy. And in the last few years, after China slowed, India has become the fastest growing large economy in the world. Today, it is the fifth largest economy after the United States, China, Germany, and Japan. And the rate at which it is growing, it is highly likely that it is going to become the third largest economy at market exchange rates in the next 3 years itself. So it will, its size of GDP, though not in per capita GDP, will already have exceeded that of Germany and Japan in the next 2 or 3 years. And please note, I'm saying at market exchange rate. At purchasing power parity, we have been the third largest economy since 2007. Okay? So this is the background of the history of the language that has become fairly well known. I'm sure you've also been familiar with it. which is that, India is one of the fastest growing large economies in the world. India still remains, by the way, a very poor country. Its per capita income is still quite low. So let me show you that I have not come here as a propagandist. I'm an economist, and I am someone who doesn't work for the government. I used to work for the government 11 years ago.
Not this government.
Not this government, thank God. Absolutely, thank God. And I'm deeply critical of this, and I'm publicly critical of the current government. On television, in my writings in the press, on YouTube channels and all public. So the question that I'm asking is a question that I have posed repeatedly to our own policymakers publicly, and I thought I'd bring this topic to you because you would also have been exposed, if you read the Financial Times or the Economic Times, or you watch CNN, or BBC, etc., to this lingo of India being the, fast growing large economy. So it's true, it is. It's true. As you will learn, as will explain as to how and what that is. But the fact of the matter is that we are still a relatively young country. And let me say a few words about this notion of a young country, because this is of considerable relevance to all of you as well. Some of you attended, I think, my lecture that happened to go up, the PPT for that happened to go up just now, which is inequality in MENA, why it is so difficult to reduce, and what can be done. And like MENA, which is one of the most unequal countries in the world, India is also a relatively unequal country. And that's a bit of a problem. One dimension of the inequality in India is that we have a large young population, and the numbers which are getting added to the working age population are still growing, and they will continue to grow for another 15 more years, after which the numbers will begin to shrink, those entering the workforce. When those entering the working age population begins to shrink, that's when we say the demographic dividend is over. Okay? It's very important for you to understand conceptually this notion of what is the demographic dividend, because it comes but once in the life of every nation. And my suspicion is that you, Egypt, are currently in that phase of development also. You have to figure out how long your demographic dividend is going to last. And I want to say a few words, since the majority in this room may not fully understand what the notion of the demographic dividend is. I think I would want to spell that out, and the value, the historic importance of the period of the demographic dividend. You define the demographic dividend in the life of a nation as that period in the life of that nation when the share of the working age population is rising and the share of the dependent population is falling. The dependent population consists of those who are under 15 and those who are over working age, meaning 60 or 65. Okay? The dependent share is falling and the share of the working age is rising. And why is that seen as a dividend? It's seen as a dividend because of the following developments that happen in some ways almost automatically. But notice what I said, almost automatically, but because policy is absolutely critical to it. Something that I will come back to, but I think you need to understand conceptually what it is first. It's called a dividend because in that period, one assumes that a process of structural change will also happen, because when your population is growing rapidly, what is in fact happening is that most of these people are joining the agricultural labor force, they are in rural areas, and if you want to become a developed country, which is what the aspiration of most developing countries in the global south is, then what you want to do is to move these potential workers, these young, or those who are in the agricultural labor force, into industry and in services. Why do you want to move them there, and why will they sort of almost automatically move there? Because the productivity in industry is higher than in agriculture. The productivity in services is higher than in agriculture. So because productivity is higher, incomes are going to be higher. As incomes are going to be higher, overall incomes in the economy, in the society will rise. As incomes rise, the share that is consumed will rise. The overall consumption will rise, but the share of what is held back as savings will also rise, isn't it? In other words, the savings to GDP ratio will rise. That's absolutely critical to the process of development. Because when the savings to GDP ratio rises in the structural change process, when the structure of output and the structure of employment is changing in favor of industry and services, when savings rise, domestic savings become available for investment. So the investment to GDP ratio rises. As the investment to GDP ratio rises, inevitably growth rates will rise. Because investment is what drives growth. Foundational development economics concept that you're all already familiar with, but I'm just reminding you. Just keep this in mind throughout in the discussion, because this is foundational to the argument I'm about to make. And therefore, this period when the share of the working age population is rising and the share of the dependents is falling, in the early stages of this process, the share of the young, meaning the children, is falling, while in the later stages, the share of the elderly is increasing. And that's why the dependents share is increasing, because obviously TFR drops, total fertility rate, that's the share of the population, the number of children that are born to a woman of reproductive age between 15 and 49. Okay? Now, just to give you a sense of what MENA TFRs look like, this is what I presented on the 11th, on the 10th, that there are, of the 19 MENA countries, in the Middle East and North Africa, about 11 countries have a TFR between 2.1 and 3, and the remaining 8 have a TFR which is less than 2.1. Who can tell me what the value or importance of 2.1 TFR is? Not the teachers, only the students. Yeah.
I know from class it's important.
She was there.
Yeah, you were there. But no. You see, I'm asking a slightly different question. I'm asking the question that if you want to stabilize the population of a country, you must bring your TFR down to 2.1. What does that mean? It means that your generation, you the young, reproduces your parents, essentially. Your parents, father and the mother, reproduce themselves in your generation. So as long as you are 2 or less, it's a good thing your population will stop growing. It's said to be not 2 but 2.1, because even in the richest countries there's infant mortality. So the 0.1 is to take care of that. That's the only. So I'm saying, in your region, in your countries, your TFR is between for most of the countries, more than half the countries, the TFR is between 2.1 and 3. Therefore, your population is still growing. You're likely to be in that range where the share of the young is still increasing. So you're in the demographic dividend. This is your homework. This is for you to figure out where your TFR is, how many years before your dividend ends. This requires a bit of sort of donkey work. Maybe this is your next homework assignment. Anyway, never mind that. Let's come back to India. The point here I was making, is that India's dividend began in the early 1980s. We're already 45 years into our dividend. This dividend is going to end in 2040, 15 years from now. we will become an aging society, because that's the transition that's already happening. Please try and appreciate and understand this. This is a profoundly important development where you will cease being a young country predominantly, and you will become like the Europeans have become, like Japan has become, Australia has become aging society. Because they are becoming aging societies, you will have to provide for two things that happen as the share of the aged or the elderly in the population rises. One is pensions for all of them, and secondly, you will have to provide healthcare for a share of the population which is increasing, the elderly, who will live longer because life expectancies are rising. You get the point? So in other words, both these have to be provided for now, fiscally provisioned for starting now, before you become an elderly or an aging society, in order that you are prepared for that aging to come. Because why am I saying this? China, its dividend is over around 2012, 2013. China's leaders have been saying for the last 10 years, we have become old without becoming rich. While Europe became old after they became rich. Profoundly important distinction that the Chinese leaders have understood. And now back to India. You have to sort of think about your own societies at a later date. Come back to India now. That's what I'm here to talk to you about. India's dividend is ending in 15 years. I'll show you that in a minute. And therefore, we have to provide jobs very quickly in the non-farm sector to all the young that are continuing to join the labor force. And this, I say this because I'm speaking to a largely young audience, and I know from ILO data that in your region, in the MENA region, female unemployment rates are 38% and male unemployment rates are 24%. That should worry you. I know it wouldn't worry you guys, because you're studying in AUC and you think you're the creme de la creme and you're going to transition to the rest of, to the labor market in the rest of the world. Never mind, I was meant to be half a joke. I'm going to move on. So India is growing fast, but is it creating jobs? We need to create jobs for the young who are joining the labor force, getting much better educated. So let's talk about India growing fast. And I'm saying, yes, India is growing fast, but not so fast as it should, as it needs to, because India is still growing at something like 6.5%, 7% per annum, and India's population is exceeding that of China. So I appreciate that. And we have to raise per capita incomes very rapidly in the run-up to the end of the demographic dividend by 2040. And therefore, we need to grow much faster. So in the forthcoming book, India Out of Work, Bloomsbury, London is just about to come. I've argued that we need to grow at 8% per annum, and we need to create something like 11 million jobs, non-farm jobs each year, if we are going to employ all these young people who are joining the labor force each year. Don't think that this is not a challenge for your countries. It is. I've already built it. Moving on. So India must grow at 8% per annum for 20 or 25 years to avoid the middle income trap. I'm not going to develop this middle income trap idea. I've already done that on the 10th here. Because India is a low middle income country. It first has to transition to becoming an upper middle income country. You guys are at upper middle income country status. To become India's government has already announced that we need to become, before we become, as a country 100 years old in 2047, India became independent in 1947, we'll be 100 at 2047, we have to become a high income country by 2047. We have only 22 years left for that. And so first we have to transition from being an LMIC, a low middle income country, to a UMIC, upper middle income country. That means from our current threshold, we have to move not only to a per capita income of 4,400, we then have to transition all the way up to $14,005 at market exchange rates. That's the threshold, starting threshold of the high income countries. Okay? That's where we've got to move to very rapidly. You can imagine the challenge, and the jobs challenge I've already mentioned. So I'm not going to get into the middle income trap, that's going to take me too far away. But yes, it is true that, and this is one message that I want to leave you with, which is the following: that India has managed to grow very fast between 2004 and 15 at something like 8% per annum, 7.8% per annum. We are now growing at only 6.5 or 7. That's not good enough. But we have managed to do much better earlier. That's the point that I'm making. And in the last 10 years, unfortunately, we are growing less fast, only partly on account of COVID. Please, I mean, I can get into the discussion on COVID. I'm not going to go into the detail there. If you're in questions, we can go there. But more important is, in the last 10 or 11 years, we've grown at only 5.8%. That's just not good enough. We've done it before, and we've created 7.5 million new non-farm jobs each year when we were adding much smaller numbers of young into the labor force. Therefore, we've done it before, we can do it. It's just that we've got to get the policies right. Something that I will come to later on. Moving on very rapidly. In the interest of time, I've spent a fair bit of time in this preliminary work, preliminary sort of laying the groundwork. India is still, by the way, only at $2,800 per capita. You are at about $5,500 per capita. Okay, so you can imagine how far away we are. So we may be a fast-growing economy, but we have to grow fast. We have no choice in the matter. If we don't grow fast, there's not a hope in hell that we're going on to become a high-income country. Okay, moving on. I'm not going to go into these details here. What we've got to avoid, and this is something which the World Development Report of the World Bank focuses on in 2024. If you're all interested, you can Google it, download it. It's all downloadable these days. And it's essentially making the argument that a middle income trap is something that is faced by the vast majority of countries. So, and only 34 countries between 1990 and 2021, they say, have actually transitioned to become high-income countries, and they have all faced very special circumstances. Many of these are former East European countries because they were already at upper middle income level. Even if they grew at 1% per annum for the next 20 years, they became high-income countries. You get the point? So, we've had these countries which have made that transition. There are very few of them. Chile is one. And so you have some very special cases. Chile's population is 17 million. We are talking about 1.4 billion people. You understand? Our most populous state, our single most populous state, has a population twice as large as Egypt's population. Our second most populous state has a population still larger than your population. You get the point with the kind of challenge that we are facing. So anyway, you get the point. I'm going to move on. In addition, I just want to flag this. Wealth inequality. We're a fast-growing economy, no question. But how much is our incomes rising at the bottom of the pyramid? That's a profoundly important subject because that's what sustains the growth rate over a long period of time. Because it means that your market size is growing constantly. It's very important that inequality doesn't increase too much. Yes, some inequality is acceptable, some inequality is going to happen with rapid growth, some people are going to benefit more, but you cannot be in a situation where inequality opens up like that. You don't want that because what you want to see happen is that the people in the bottom 50% of the income distribution also see rising incomes so that demand and consumption keeps rising so that the rate of production can go on increasing. Simple logic. Okay, moving on. Unfortunately, India has become one of the most unequal countries in the world over the last 20 years. Like China, like South Africa, like Brazil, Like MENA. MENA is one of the most unequal regions of the world. So if you didn't know that, wake up to smell the coffee. Moving on. I'm going to spend a very little bit of time on this question, why the jobs slow down. There has been, as I said earlier to you just now, that we were not only growing nearly 8% per annum between 2003 and 2015, we also, and that's all we need to grow at, 8%. That's good enough, as I said. We will then become a high-income country, but we also need to generate jobs. Now, we were generating 7.5 million new non-farm jobs over that period, but that number has tended to fall off. And that's what this is. Why that has happened is the question that this slide is asking. And I'm going to very briefly deal with this so that I can move on. And so because, in other words, what I'm trying to drive home to all of you is the following. Growth alone doesn't matter. Per capita income growth alone doesn't matter either. What matters is what is happening to inequality. And most importantly, even more, because you can reduce inequality if you continue to sustain non-farm job growth at a rate faster than the numbers entering the labor force. Why faster than those entering the labor force? Because when it's faster, the labor market tightens. You get the point? When the labor market tightens, real wages begin to increase. That's what you want to see happen. If real wages begin to increase, then the consumption demand grows. People's, reliance or focus on just meeting their consumption, food consumption needs are met, and they are spending much more on non-food items, and that's what you want to see happen, because then domestic production of non-food items or imports of non-food items can grow. Preferably domestic production, not imports. Because when imports are happening, so if Egypt is not producing cars, that means you're importing cars, all the demand that is getting generated for demand is actually generating jobs in other countries. You want jobs generation in your country. That's why we talk about industrial policy, a subject I will come back to, right? And Professor Amar Adli's project, Pathways, which in a sense has organized this lecture for you, is very much focused on industrial policy, which is a fantastically important thing. It's a subject I'll come back to. So anyway, point is, you've understood the overall. I mean, there are 4 drivers of growth, which I will just speak very briefly about. One of my worries, which I keep driving home in my academic work, but also my public writings and speeches, is that, private consumption, which is one driver of growth, the first driver of growth, is not growing fast enough. That's a real problem. And in fact, what has happened, our data is showing that, the private consumption has recently been maintained ever since the growth rate fell by household savings being actually cut back, which is a foundational problem. As I began by telling you, savings to GDP ratio must continue to rise, so that investment to GDP ratio rises, so that jobs rise. That's the logic here, macroeconomic logic. Moving on rapidly. That's why you don't want to allow inequality to grow. Second, what's the second driver of growth? The second driver of growth is gross fixed capital formation or investment to GDP. And the important point is that the reason why China grew as rapidly as they did for such a long period of time is that they had a mind-blowing investment to GDP ratio. Focus on what I'm saying. Very carefully listen to what I'm saying. Investment to GDP ratio in China over that 30-year period, believe it or not, rarely fell below 40%. That's a mind-blowing level of investment to GDP ratio. Because that means you're constantly generating jobs in the non-farm sector and you're pulling workers out of agriculture. Absolutely critical that you pull workers out of agriculture. I already said that. That was the logic of the demographic dividend being realized. So that's how they maintain 9 to 10% growth alongside with job creation in the non-farm sector. Okay? Very important. Now, our savings to GDP ratio had risen very dramatically from the early 2000s till about 2007-8. The point is, over a 10-year period, when I was in government from 2004 to 14, our savings to GDP ratio went from what was 23% of GDP in 2003 to 37% at the end of the first decade of this century. That's a very rock solid 14 percentage point increase in a matter of 6 years. As a result of that, investment to GDP ratio rose from 24% in 2003 to 38% by the end of the first decade. No wonder the growth rate was nearly 8% per annum, because that's the driver of growth. That, unfortunately, in the last 9 or 10 years, thanks to the policy-induced errors of the current government, which has been in power since 2015, the GFCF, or the gross fixed capital formation, or investment to GDP ratio, has fallen down to an average, or the range is between 26 to 31%. Okay, very important. We're going to move on very rapidly in the interest of time. Exports is the third driver, so please, of course, think about domestic demand. This is what I was focused on. But don't ignore export demand, because you're in the initial stages of development, your market size and therefore domestic consumption demand is not going to be as high as you would like it if you want to grow really fast. So exports are very important. Net exports are important. And unfortunately, our exports weren't doing so well in the last 8 or 10 years compared to the first 25 years after our economic reforms began in 1991. Anyway, so that leaves you with the fourth driver of growth, other than the private consumption, investment, and exports, which is government investment. And government investment, well, obviously, if growth slows, then revenues of the government slow. If revenues of the government slow, then the capacity of the government to actually invest constrained. That's a real problem. Because in any developing society, including yours, the government must continue to invest in infrastructure. And it should not do things like starting a monorail and then letting it go. I'm only half joking, but you understand where I'm coming from. Because this is what is this telling you? Either there is government investment is not being prioritized in infrastructure, is not being prioritized. Because please understand, government investment in infrastructure generates jobs in the construction sector. That's the least skilled kind of jobs that are being generated. It's a wonderful way of pulling workers out of agriculture. That's what China did. China transformed itself because they made massive investments in both infrastructure. I mean, I've been going to China since the mid-90s, and every time I've visited, my eyes just pop out when I look at the infrastructure. Because the transformation every few years is utterly remarkable. Something similar is happening in India, but not on the same scale, and we need to do damn sight when we do it. How's that feasible? The only way it's going to be feasible is if the government is actually generating revenues consistently. And if oil remains your only source of revenue, you ain't getting there. Which means you have to diversify your economy. And if you diversify your economy, then your revenues are coming in from other sectors as well. And then because you have then a sustainable source of government revenues coming in over a period of time. That's not the only reason. The second reason, I keep making this contrast because it's very important that I keep making you think about your own region and your own society. Because I know the tax to GDP ratio in your region is pathetic, is appalling. When I started to look at the data, I mean, it would interest you to know that we are still a low middle income country. We are poorer than most of the countries in the world. But guess what our tax to GDP and total revenue to GDP ratio? 20%. Forget about China, they're at 30%. never mind. We're at 20%. I'm sorry, it's actually come down in China from that high number. But more important point is, you're at 10. Come on, wake up and smell the coffee. You understand? You're not going to be able to get the public investment in infrastructure that you want to see. Why is that also important? Because that generates, suppose you open up your monorail. It opens up new areas and you can build new cities. Not a city of, new ruins like New Cairo. I'm talking about real estate in the private sector where people come and live because you're pulling workers out of agriculture and they're coming in to live there. That means it has to be low-cost housing. It can't be middle and upper middle class housing, because the middle and upper middle class is a sliver of the total population. You get the point I'm making? Okay, moving on very rapidly. And we've also recovered very fast from the COVID, very fast. And it is absolutely true that there is a segment of our economy which is growing very fast, which is we call it the new economy. The HSBCs, Morgan Stanleys and Standard & Poor's, etc. They're all talking about this new economy of India, which is what? We are one of the major manufacturers now of mobile handsets in the world, and we export mobile handsets for the last 8 to 10 years. Massive numbers. Pharmaceuticals. We are a major manufacturer of pharmaceuticals on the globe, and we are also of vaccines, and we supplied COVID vaccines across the globe because of all vaccines produced in the world, 60% come from India. Of all generic drugs consumed in Europe or North America, 30% come from India. Automobiles. 20 years ago, we hardly had an automobile industry. Today, whether you think of two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, trucks, buses, we are either the second or third or fourth largest manufacturer of automobiles in each of these sectors on the globe. And of course, we are a major exporter. I was just telling you, my friends, that just a month ago I bought a Tata EV, an electric vehicle manufactured by India, by an Indian company, using its own technology. 1 month ago, I also, in my own home, commissioned a solar plant, a home solar plant. Why? Because obviously you can't have a situation where energy intensity of fast growth leads to excessive demand in a very hot country for energy. Because otherwise you have blackouts, you have brownouts, you have too little excess electricity available for the poor who suffer from that even more than we will. Okay? Very important in hot countries that we need to keep in mind. And of course our IT services are a boom sector, and even India is certainly gaining global market shares in all of these areas since 2017. And a question was put to me the other day when I was giving a class for Professor Agli about our high-tech startups and our IT services. See, India used to be a giant call center in the 1990s. It's not any longer. In the 2000, it became a software services provider. It still does that. It's not doing that alone any longer. It's gone well beyond that. We are now selling accounting, legal, R&D services to international companies all across the globe. As a result of which, what have emerged are India has become a hub of global capability centers. Global capability centers provide all these various services. And 1,700 global capability centers have mushroomed in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, in Delhi, in Bombay, Pune, etc. Okay? Moving. So this is the sort of new economy which has grown, and we have a very vibrant startup ecosystem. 10 years ago, we had about 1,000 startups. the startups tend to be mostly in the space of fintech, of e-commerce, of edtech, of logistics, and so on. Today, we have 150,000 startups. We already have 100 unicorns. You know what unicorn is? Companies which have grown to become having a turnover of $1 billion in less than 10 years. That's 100 billion, dollar billionaires being sort of in the startup industry. Not billionaires, but turnover of 100. The rate at which startups are growing in our country is such that if today we have, 10 years ago we had 1,000, today we have 150,000 startups. In 10 years, by 2035, we are projected to have 1 million startups. Okay? So you can see that there is a new economy that has emerged, is emerging, is booming. Trouble is, the kind of people that these people want are all high-tech, highly specialized. People who have high levels of education, somewhat like you people. But we have a large population that has to be given jobs. Something that will come back. So the point is, yes, our new economy is growing. The country has created a digital public infrastructure. What is a digital public infrastructure? Let me explain. Every Indian has an ID card, a biometric ID. Every Indian, and this happened between 2009 and now. Now, every Indian, please appreciate, means 1.4 billion people. Okay? That's the scale of the use of technology to get everyone a biometric card. But that's just the beginning. What that enabled was that every individual could be then now identified, and therefore bank accounts could be easily opened without too much hassle. We went from, in 2013, bank account, the share of households that had a bank account from about 50% of the total population, rural and urban taken together, to now 80%. In a population, please understand, 1.4 billion people. Can someone tell me what the share of population which has a bank account in this country is? Not the teachers. Okay. Give me a guess. Give me a guess. Give me a guess. Yes, this is a game we are playing, my Come on. Give me a guess, I'm saying.
30%.
Another guess.
Not gonna.
Yeah.
25.
Not bad. You're getting there. You're at 20%. Your per capita income is twice ours, for God's sake. You get the point I'm making? It's perfectly feasible. Why is that important? It's important for the following reason. Because it means that you're capturing all these people's savings. They have savings. Don't think the poor don't have savings. Of course they have savings. So where is it being held? How is it being held? The government doesn't even know. If you had their savings there, what is that going to involve? It means that the savings to GDP ratio begins to rise. Go back to the theory that I was telling you in the beginning. So if your savings rise, your domestic savings rise, investment to GDP ratio rise. Correct? That's why this is important. Digital public infrastructure. The poorest people, the little vendor on the street, in the village, and everywhere, has a mobile phone. 1 billion of the 1.4 population has a phone. 700 million have a smartphone, the rest have a feature phone. Point is, the numbers are rising at the rate of 5 to 10 million a month. Smartphone numbers. Okay? So what I'm saying is that you enable this digital and public infrastructure to be used for payments. Formalization. You have a highly informalized economy. You want to make all these people get a credit history. If you have a credit history, payments history, it can be used by the banks and you get the point. How things connect. You have a bank account, You have a credit history, and now you're bankable. In other words, you're credit worthy. You get the point? Absolutely critical. Otherwise, that poor vendor who you might buy your falafel from the street, that poor fellow has no access to a bank account, and therefore he has no access to institutional credit. Not having access to institutional credit, that means that poor Jack is, if he needs to borrow, even for his working capital, he's borrowing at 20, 30, 40% per annum, which means much higher rates than the billionaire industrialists or the construction companies who are building New Cairo. You understand what I'm saying? Because they can borrow from the bank at the prevailing rate of interest. The world of a difference it makes if you do what I'm saying. Moving on very rapidly. The new economy is growing in India, but the new economy is still only 15% of the total economy. How is that going to drive growth at 8% per annum? That's the question I am asking. Because the new economy plus its spillover effects, shall we say, externalities as they are called, positive externalities, at best will give you only a 6.5% growth rate. Not good enough. So moving on. Can the new economy energize the old economy? Yes, in many ways it can. I think I've been hinting at that. Digital infrastructure can help clusters of small manufacturing firms enjoy advantages of large manufacturers in the sense of cheaper credit, larger end markets, new credit platforms, tech solutions for agriculture. But then, this raises another question. Are all these so-called informal sector enterprises, are they all registered? Does the state know about them? If they are not registered, then how is the state going to provide these so-called services if that unit is not registered at all? You get the point I'm making? The construction company that is building these houses that you see in New Cairo, they're all registered companies. The government knows about them. That vendor on the street who's selling falafel and kebabs, not registered anywhere, not required. Where is the state? How do you want to provide any of these damn new economy services to them? That's the question I'm asking you to ask. Moving on. In all of this, where does industrial policy come in? Right? Very critical. Why is industrial policy necessary? It's necessary for the obvious reason that I began by telling you when I was conceptualizing the demographic dividend for you, that you want to see structural change taking place, workers moving out of agriculture into industry, the contribution of industry and services, contribution to gross value added in GDP increasing at the expense of agriculture. For that to happen, for that structural change to take place, and do it rapidly. Why do I say do it rapidly? Before your demographic dividend ends. You have a time threshold there, a deadline there. If you don't do it rapidly, you will not become a high-income country. You get the point? That's the constraint. Therefore, you have to do this rapidly. So, if you don't have a conscious, deliberate, well-crafted industrial strategy, how are you going to do this rapidly? You get the point I'm making? Now, unfortunately for India and Indians, India has not had a proper, explicit, horizontal industrial policy for the last 30 and 35. So we've grown, but not as fast as we could have grown. We need a planning institution. We need a planning commission. Does Egypt have a planning commission? I don't know.
We do.
How powerful is it? How strong is it? How capable is it? How many staff does it have? Does it have an industrial policy? That's the question. You may have it. Those are the real questions. our great government in the last 8-10 years has done away with that planning commission. We are the only Asian country which doesn't have the equivalent of a planning institution. The Asians have grown fast, the Africans and the Latin Americans have not grown fast. And that's why they are in a middle income trap. How have the Asians grown fast? Because they've all had an industrial policy within a planning strategy. Because in order to have a planning strategy, you have to have a planning ministry or a planning commission. When I came back from abroad 18 years ago, what did I do? I didn't become an academic, which I could have. I said, I'm joining my planning commission. And I served our planning commission for 8 to 10 years. In 2015, this great new government has abolished it, demolished it. Let me give you a contrast. China. After the economic reforms began in 1979, 1980, the then State Planning Commission, after China became a market economy, the Planning Commission became more powerful, not less powerful. You would have expected that in a new non-planned economy, a new market economy, the Planning Commission would fade away. No, the exact opposite happens. Their state, National Development and Reforms Commission becomes the driver of their industrial policy. Please try and appreciate this. Okay, moving very rapidly through. I just want you to look at this graph because it is showing what unfortunately has happened to India's manufacturing output share in total GDP. It has declined since 2012. This is tragic. Look where it was in 2012, 17.5%. After that, it has systematically fallen. Unfortunately. That means this government is simply, this pattern of growth that has emerged in the last 10 or 11 years is the opposite of what it claims it is promoting, supposedly promoting. You get the point? You are seeing what I have said in my previous slide that, the new economy is growing. Yes, no question. But it's pretty much all, what are the startups? They are all in the services sector. The global capability centers all in the services sector. We are a great services-driven economy. What is the manufacturing? That's the worry. That heterodox economists like me, and especially people who know the system and know government, worry about and keep talking about it, and this is what happens. It's not just this. I was saying you need to pull workers out of agriculture into industry and services. Look what has happened here. I want you to, you've got a screen. Do I have a laser here or can I just, do I have a laser? No. It's okay, don't worry. No, it doesn't matter. Notice that over this period, the number of workers in agriculture was falling systematically, which is what I was saying to you. That's what needs to happen. Isn't it? That's what structural change is all about. Because if the number of workers in agriculture falls,
that's millions?
These are millions. Okay. We were in the year 20, it has been dropping from 270 odd million systematically down to this level, and it has since then risen in recent years, unfortunately, by about 80 million. Shocking, and it is unfortunate that this is not the latest, this is up to 22. I have 2024 data which showing that the numbers have gone up to 280 million. So the opposite of what was I showing earlier? Manufacturing as a share of GDP is coming down, and I'm also here showing to you that agriculture share has gone up very rapidly, just to show you that what happens to the dividend. Very important you understand this. Our dividend ends here, 2041. The numbers of those in the working age begins to fall off. That's what you physically see happening. The number of youth, 15 to 29, already falling off. Very important. Okay? So the dividend is ending. We're running out of time. You don't want to run out of time. You want, if your aspiration is to become a high income country. So now, very quickly, I'm going to show you 2 more slides and I'm going to end and open up myself up for discussion. We have to provide jobs for 4 groups of people. What are they? And I'm sure these groups are not dissimilar to the groups that have to be provided jobs in your own economy. There is a flow of young people, 15 to 29-year-olds, who are all getting much better educated, who are entering the labor force. And obviously with the aspiration of looking for work. They're looking for work. How many are entering? 6 million entering the labor force each year. We have to provide jobs for them. Enrollment at every level has risen dramatically. We produce 1.5 million engineers graduate each year. 8.5 million young people graduate either from fields of commerce or science or management and pharmacy, etc. That's already 10 million people per year. Okay? And girls are a very significant share of this. However, girls are not getting jobs. The young boys are not getting jobs, so how are girls going to get it? Obviously. The labor force participation rate for the young is very, girls in particular is low. There's another stock which I've already mentioned, won't dwell on it. We have far too many workers in agriculture already in 2017. 80 million have been added on account of the very poor policies and how COVID was managed. And policy-induced shocks has sent workers back, having caused unemployment in industry and services. They've gone back to agriculture. That's the opposite of what you want to see happen, as I demonstrated to you. That's a stock of people you have to pull out. Not just the 80 million who've gone back, but even those, the 200 million who were already there, because what are they producing? They're contributing 15% to the India's GDP. Meaning 42% of the workforce was producing 15% of the GDP. Very low productivity. Therefore, you had to pull workers out of agriculture even before 2017-18. Now even more so, massive, looming crisis. That's the title of that slide. And of course, the numbers of unemployed has grown on account of all this. And then you have this phenomenon of the youth who are not in education, not in employment or training. These are called NEETs. This is an increasing worry in Europe. It's an even bigger worry in India, because believe it or not, the number of these people, they want jobs. They're able to work. They're willing to work. They're not actually looking for work. Why they are not looking for work? Because jobs are not being created in the non-farm sector. So they become what are called discouraged workers. Learn this terminology. Discouraged worker. You don't want that to happen. People fall out of the labor force. They stop looking. And that number used to be in 2012, only 51 million. It had doubled in the next 10 years to 100 million. It's a mind-blowing number for us if we were planners. So you can imagine that in all of this is a very worrying scenario. I will close with one last slide about what the components of what could be an industrial strategy. This is a very detailed paper that I've written about what the 7 or 8 components of an industrial policy in India can be, should be, that India will need to adopt if you're going to grow at 8% per annum. I'm just going to summarize it for you and take it to the last slide. Here it is. Sorry. Oops. Take it to the last slide. Yeah, here we are. Very good. Creating jobs for you. What are the components of an industrial strategy? First, the East Asian success stories, which we all know about, became success stories because all of them had an industrial policy. China did, and all the other East Asians did. They are miracle economies. Why are they miracle economies? One of the most important reasons is that they had an industrial strategy. Now, there are dimensions of it which I have too little time to explain, so I will not go into that. The important point here is that India needs to get an industrial policy. And second, we need to allow the rupee to depreciate it. That second number is not appreciate, it's depreciate so that exports can remain competitive. We've not allowed that to happen, unfortunately. That's a serious problem that our economists are in the policy making. Third, we need to focus on 5 labor-intensive manufacturing sectors. These 5 labor-intensive sectors account for 50% of the manufacturing jobs: garments, textiles, food processing, leather footwear, and wooden furniture. 50%. That means there has to be a package for each of these 5 sectors, because then we can actually ensure growth of jobs. Fourth, it's not the large corporates which generate jobs, because they prefer capital-intensive technologies. They've tended to adopt in India capital-intensive technologies, therefore they are not generating jobs at the rate that we need to generate jobs. So the focus of policy needs to be on the micro, small, and medium enterprises, which need to be better supported through a cluster development program. Learn about what cluster development is. Cluster development strategies were adopted by all late industrializers. China did, North Italy did. All late industrializers adopted a cluster development program. Also, we need to focus on better educators.